All the second stage tanks now pressurized. All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 384. Hail, hail, the witches are defunded. Because, we have to watch our language. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator, Lauren Brooks, and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson.
Oh.
And we have the... Hello, guys. And we have the Doge in charge, Brian Martinez, working with in the background, fighting with both OBS and Restream tonight, because they're being a couple of bitches. There we go. There's the language. And tonight, we fooled you a little bit. We're not talking about the USAIDs infection. We've got better news. Better news that I am intensely happy about and have been doing happy dances about. But before we get into it, we've got to do what we've got to do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justtip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the Thought Police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And with that, as you can see from the shared screen here that I've got going on, we are looking at a presidential action on withdrawing the United States from international organizations, conventions, and treaties that are contrary to the interests of the United States. So why would I be excited about this? Because, I know that some people are very concerned. I've seen some statements about some of these things that people are very upset about because they're considering them to be a threat to peace with the United States. But there is one in particular that I am just beside myself with happiness about. And as we get down here, it takes a minute to find it because it isn't labeled the way that you would think. So, let's see. There we go. So, the UN entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women is UN Women. So, right now, according to this paper, I hate that this thing exists. Let's see if I can shrink the text a little bit so I can see. No, it's not going to let me do that. Dang it, that wasn't showing before, and now it is. It drives me nuts. All right. But I'll read it anyway. So, by the authority vested in president by the Constitution of the laws and the laws of the United States of America, the president has hereby directed via Order 14199, withdrawing the United States from and ending funding to certain United Nations organizations and reviewing the United States support to all international organizations. Blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of legalese there. Based on the Secretary of State's report and deliberating with his cabinet, which essentially means they actually looked at what these organizations are doing. They didn't just do it on the basis of, well, I don't like what this organization says it represents. The actual basis for this decision was, we don't like what these organizations are doing. What are their actions? Or there are organizations from which the United States will withdraw, and there are multiple non-UN organizations here.
Before we get into it, a lot of us are wondering what exactly it is that the United Nations does, because as far as a lot of us know, all they ever do is say things. I mean, they extract money, they extract funding from all kinds of countries, including the US, and this is the big story. The US is no longer going to siphon an ungodly amount of money into this institution that, as far as we know, just says a bunch of things, including how everyone should focus their morality on the well-being of women and only women. But yeah, I among others am wondering, what does the UN actually do? What did it ever do other than say a bunch of things? And saying things is doing things to some extent, only as long as saying those things results in other people doing things. And I suppose that's it, right?
Well, the UN, their function is for world leaders to get together and hold meetings to determine the content of treaties and to decide how to fight with world leaders that are not part of the UN. So national leaders, basically, that are not part of the UN, over things that the nations that are part of the UN have decided are important enough to kill people over. And that's essentially it. That is the entirety of what the UN does. There is no something better that you can say about it that could justify the actions that they take, or the content of the various treaties that occur as a result of UN actions, UN meetings and stuff. And then the other thing that the UN does is take money that countries pay into it and distribute it to some of these sub-organizations or to various nations for different purposes. So it is a giant money laundering organization, in a way, in a pretty big way, actually. And I think a lot of people recognize that already. But the hullabaloo that's going to come out of this is going to, I think, help more people recognize that. Because I think the United States is actually the biggest funder of UN Women. I don't think they get more money from somewhere else than they get from us. And so if that's true, if I'm right about that, they're going to raise holy hell about the United States ceasing to fund them. And you'll start seeing all this victim-y bullshit on sites like X, because they're gonna try to guilt trip the president into changing his mind. They don't know how to do it in any other way, right? They don't really have.
Basically, imagine if Grima Wormtongue wasn't just Grima Wormtongue, but like the guild of Grima Wormtongues. Like for every king of every nation, there's a Grima Wormtongue behind him, funded by the UN. The UN being funded by all these nations, especially the US, and now some kind of Gandalf emerging from the USA has shoved his stuff in the guild of Grima Wormtongue's face and gone, "Get thee gone," or whatever it was in the script, or ever. This is where the metaphor breaks down, because it's not one king; it's all kinds of kings. It's not the king that's waking up from his intoxicated slumber. It's just the guild of Grima Wormtongues that that no longer have the magical power that they once had, and they have no choice but to crawl back into the woodwork, so to speak. And I'm here for it.
Yeah, me as well. I'm here for it as well. And we have night motorcyclists in the chat talking about some of the other stuff that's going on. And yeah, the Europeans are quite mad about this. Now, why won't there we go. I can't scroll back up, but yeah, notice how it's mostly white women supporting this crap. To be fair, UN Women actually does have it's international, but I think there will be more white women complaining about the change than there will be women of various colors, various shades of brown and gold. But in any case, yeah, we will see weeping and gnashing of teeth, and we probably will see a lot of liberal white women in the United States making it out like the women of the world just can't survive without an American sugar daddy, which, you know, kind of kills the whole strong, independent women who don't need no man narrative that they like to play out.
Fortunately, the liberal white women of the USA are currently distracted by a certain incident in Minnesota that they are currently using to distract us from another incident in Minnesota, namely the Somalians fucking frauding $10 billion from the American taxpayer. So they're like going all in on this. Look, this lesbian mother has been killed for no reason, just absolutely no reason.
No, it has nothing to do with the fact that she was trying to run the guy over.
No, right. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that, and that's good
Yeah.
because that means we're not talking about the UN getting defunded.
Yeah. So I really am here for it. So in the last several months, we've had a lot of discussion about how UN Women has spent money in foreign countries. And Night Motorcyclist, by the way, says they will never leer. We also got Meredith G gave us $5 and in a super chat and says, "Honey for the Badgers, HBR Talk 384. What does the UN do? Nothing. It's an organized crime syndicate that tries to present itself as wanting peace and morality, and that is true. The UN kind of shakes down the rest of the world for money, or at least the member nations for money, and organizes aggression against other foreign nations that are also being shaken down for money. But there isn't, like, you hear about UN peacekeeping forces. UN peacekeeping forces are soldiers moving into a nation as an act of war, usually in response to something that they've called an act of war. Let's see. Absolute Troll Y5U said, "What got defunded? Did it actually get defunded or another Doge fake out?" No, this actually got defunded. This is a presidential order that we are removing funding from these organizations. We are leaving the 24/7 carbon-free energy compact, which I'm excited about. Nice. There are several things that we're getting out of. And a lot of them are things like the Freedom Online Coalition, if I remember right, is a communist organization, not a freedom organization. So a lot of these things, like when you look at the name, it sounds like he's doing something awful and leaving a very important, good organization that does good things. But then when you find out their actual practices, what they do, that you're not looking at the president leaving something that we should have been, that we should have stuck with and funded. Like with UN Women, We'll go back to that part of the list. So, entity for gender equity and the empowerment of women. All right. We just went through the articles that they published on the Manosphere. All right. And the Manosphere actually includes a lot of women. There are a lot of us who are part of the men's rights movement. There are women who are involved in more traditional ends of it. There are women who are red pill. There are women who are supportive of MGTOW, been going their own way. And there are women who are even supportive of the pickup artist community. God knows why. But they are. There are women who support the pickup artist community's theories on mating habits and such, and what's right and so on, and in terms of how people should get together. And I disagree with a lot of that, but one thing I do agree with is that the whole body count thing, in terms of women's body count mattering. But in any case, there's a lot of us, and they don't empower us. They have demonized us. They have told us that we are evil. They have taken measures to try to censor us and even criminalize our speech. So I don't feel very supported by UN Women here, and they don't like us for the simple reason that we don't hate men. We don't think that men should be treated as less human than women. And so if something is a human right, it should also be a man's right, just as much as a woman's right, not just a gendered right. Human rights are not gendered. If they're gendered, they're not human rights. They're gendered rights. And of course, equal treatment under the law doesn't support the idea of gendered rights. So either feminism can say they're fighting for equality, or they can say they're fighting for gendered rights. And UN Women likes to lie about that. So they're not supporting women like us. They're not supporting women who don't want to carry the bazooka referenced in, I think it was called the Were Bitch Project or something like that. That you did, Mike. That's an old one. But
oh god, that takes me back.
Yeah, it's like forever ago.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite cartoons, though, because it's true. The bazooka refers to women's legal power to like to destroy a man with lies in court and with lies in social settings, right? And the character played by Brian actually comes out and says, I think you'd actually be a much nicer person if you just put down the bazooka. And that's true. I think a lot of what stops men and women from being able to get along is women's addiction to that power and their attempts at justifying that power, and men's legitimate fear of that power. Because that's a power that is nefarious. It's not good that a woman can destroy a man with a lie. Nobody should be able to destroy another person with a lie. Not legally or socially. And the fact that they can do it without repercussions is terrible. It's even worse than the fact that they can do it at all. Because there's, at least if there were repercussions for doing that to somebody, at least if you were going to suffer because you did that to somebody, the behavior would become limited. There would be fewer people willing to risk it, and it would take a lot worse circumstances or a lot bigger motivations for somebody to do that. Just like, even though there are many, many people who are maybe morally or ethically deviant, very few people try to rob a bank, right? Because the repercussions, even though the payoff seems like it would be huge, the repercussions, the risks, are so bad that you're unlikely to do it. So if you just put down the bazooka, you might be an actual decent person to be around, right? UN Women doesn't want women to put down the bazooka.
And yeah, in regard to the question of what UN Women actually does, or what the UN actually does, again, all they do is say things. They don't really have the power to actually do things. But that's not to say that there's no connection between saying things and doing things. It's all a matter of scale. If everyone is saying a certain thing, then that can lead people to do certain things. I mean, it's like the education system. If teachers are telling children, if teachers are saying certain things to children, then that's going to encourage children, and I say that in the nicest terms. Encourage. It's going to encourage children to do certain things, and as long as there's a monopoly on what people are allowed to say, it's going to cause a monopoly on what people are allowed to do. And yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing. This is how you have to kind of work this idea of free speech around this idea of freedom of action. Yes, people should be allowed to say anything they want, but they should not necessarily be funded to say things that not everyone necessarily wants them to say. We here at Honey Badger Radio are not particularly fond of what UN Women is telling people is the truth, given that is not exactly the truth. UN Women is in the business of fucking lying to people by omission at best, and just straight up fucking lying at worst. And yeah, this is something the mass media likes to call misinformation. And you should absolutely be allowed to say that. You should be absolutely allowed to say anything you like, even if it's a lie. But we are not under any obligation to pay you to say those lies.
Yeah, in fact.
And thank fuck that the US is finally going, yeah, no, we're not going to pay you to say those lies. Get to fuck.
Yeah, UN Women has made a practice of some interesting styles of lying. And I think in the Nuzzo letter here, this is one, right? He highlighted this. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I think it's Nuzzo, not Nuzzo, but it might be Nuzzo, which would be brilliant because he is a journalist. James Nuzzo is in the Nuzzo letter, or Nuzzo. Anyway, if somebody knows, let me know. But they had this post. This is from a while ago, because I remember responding to it. Of all journalists killed in 2011, 11% were women. In 2020, this was 6%, which means the number of female journalists killed was cut in half just about in a couple of years. On the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, let us say out loud, stop targeting women journalists. Obviously this is one where he pointed this out, and a bunch of the rest of us pointed this out as well, that's a tiny minority. In 2021, if 11% were women, then 89% were men. And in 2020, if 6% were women, then 94% were men. So the number of male journalists that was being killed went, well, the percentage of journalists being killed who were male went up. That doesn't mean the number went up.
And this is not.
It could be fewer journalists getting killed too.
This is not because the proportion of female journalists went down. The proportion of women in every white-collar job has gone up and up and up over the last few generations. It's even though the proportion of female journalists has gone up, the proportion of female journalists getting killed has only gone down. That's what that is.
Yeah, pretty much. So, they're complaining that any women are among the journalists who are getting killed. They don't mind if journalists are getting killed. They only mind if the journalists who are getting killed happen to be female. Like, that's essentially what they're saying there. So the way that they lie, though, is to look at a minority like that, tiny minority, 11%, 6% out of 100%, when the majority, 89 to 94%, are not women. They're men. And what they say is stop targeting female journalists. How do you get women are the target out of the vast, overwhelming majority of targets being men? How do you get that? You have to be able to play victim of even being a fraction of and I can tell you why most journalists who get killed are men. Right? Most journalists who go into the dangerous areas and war zones, most journalists who try to talk to the enemy and find out what they're thinking, most journalists who are in combat zones, they're men. They're not women. Women don't usually do that. Even female war correspondents are not in large numbers going into the areas where people are actively shooting at each other or where they're likely to get kidnapped by enemy soldiers, especially when the United States is at war with one of the more conservative nations of the world. I won't say patriarchal because if you look at Islam, it's really geared around protecting women from everything, and that looks like a cage because it is. It's the same kind of cage that you put your pets in when you're trying to protect them from everything. So it's not exactly patriarchal in the sense that feminists use, where they say oppression for oppression's sake. This is it feels oppressive to be caged for your own protection, but it is benevolence.
As the number of female journalists go up, the female journalists are not out there reporting on wars. They're sort of doing the equivalent of BuzzFeed articles, being like, "What Disney princess character are you?"
Yeah. Top 10 ways that women in the military still manage to be fashionable or some bullshit. Because that's what women in the military want written about them, I'm sure. They work very hard to overcome certain stereotypes, and that kind of shit comes out. We got a super child from Richard Bier, gave us $5 and said, "Well, on the surface, this looks like a good thing. I think that the celebration might be premature given how we have seen those recordings of meetings where the middle bureaucrats were bragging about getting around various policies that they don't agree with. I will also say that depending upon how many of those new hires are still at the IRS, perhaps tasking them with investigating and auditing the financial shenanigans related to certain child care and learning centers might get the ideologues to resign because they only signed up to soak the rich." It's a possibility. The thing is that unless the UN starts funding UN women, this is like a direct thing. It's not a situation where money can just be dispensed to UN women without permission, without some sort of protocol being followed to get them that money. So it would be traceable and it would be caught. Where, like, the thing that we were looking at, these were people discussing the formation of contacts and organizations as a means of continuing the work they were doing without U.S. funding and without U.S. involvement. So UN Women may reach out to a bunch of other countries to get their funding, right? But it won't be coming from the United States. That is a very big deal. And to me, I look at this. There are other nations that if the U.S. isn't funding something, they don't fund it either, or they don't. They follow suit because they don't want to spend the money. They don't try to hold it up. And I don't think that UN Women is going to be getting a whole lot of money from the nations that they've been criticizing. For instance, given their propensity to promote the other side of the conflict in Israel, I don't think that they're going to get much funding from Israel. Right? So there's one wealthy nation that won't be likely to fund them. They might get funding from European nations, but European nations are economically cutting their own noses off to spite their face right now, so they may not have a bunch of extra money to be shooting out to UN Women. Maybe China, if China thinks that they're subversive enough to the West, might fund UN Women. Maybe Russia, for the same reason, but you won't see them getting a bunch of Middle Eastern money because they have been criticizing the fuck out of Islamic states, and you probably won't see them getting any money from South America, mainly because the nations that are the most feminist in South America don't have any money. They're broke.
We don't have any money in Europe either, but they're probably going to still keep funding UN Women. The fact that the US isn't doing it anymore under Donald Trump just means they're going to go, well, if Donald Trump is doing something, we're going to do the fucking opposite.
Yeah.
This is what keeps fucking happening. Certainly in the UK. Like, the only country we were allowed to be xenophobic about is the US. So, in the event that the US is under America First policies, like as long as the fucking Democrats are in charge of the US, like the UK is going to go, oh, bravo, US, thank you so much for putting yourselves last. If only you could put the Israel last as well. But in the meantime, we're so glad that you're putting yourselves last, and we will get behind you in putting ourselves last as well. But yeah, if you've ever listened to our media, you'll know, like, the only country other than itself that they're allowed to criticize or go in the other direction from is an America that puts America first. It's getting increasingly difficult to get this through to the normies of the UK. They seem convinced that the only country that's doing anything wrong is America, and everyone else is doing everything right. And this is probably this goes especially for those in charge of the government. As soon as Keir Starmer hears about this, he's going to be like, "Oh well, wait. Well, if the Donald Trump regime isn't going to pump any more money into the UN, then we're going to triple down on our efforts. We're going to dodecaduple down on our efforts and give every last cent we have to the UN. We don't have any fucking money either. We're fucking poorer than a church mouse whose wife recently ran away with all the cheese. But that's not going to stop our government from giving every last penny to a bunch of cunts who hate us. That's just, yeah, we're still stuck in that paradigm. The UK lost, especially England lost, especially the English people lost. It's especially the people lost. It's a hell of a state of affairs, and again, you can't get this through to people because even when you try, they'll go, "Oh yeah, that sounds bad, but it must be even worse in America." No, it's not.
No, and it's going to end up becoming blatantly obvious that it's not. We're in a situation now where things are improving, and they're going to improve at a rate of speed that's going to shock the hell out of the people in Europe who support all of this UK last bullshit. They're really not going to understand what's happening here, and I think we're going to see some economic changes that are going to shock the hell out of people too. Yeah, it's they're going to end up either looking like nut jobs, trying to continue that line of thinking, or changing their minds. There will be some people, maybe not enough, but there will be some people that will change their minds simply because the evidence is going to be overwhelming. Honestly, and I think that changes in the U.S. will hopefully pull the world up with us. But yeah, and Packard's got an interesting point. Wealthy liberal white women might try to fund UN women with their husband's money. That I could see that. I could see them doing that. I could see these old biddies of the old school, like the old guard of boomer liberalism, trying to take their husband's money and keep this organization afloat. And it might for a while, but I think eventually they're going to, like, their selfishness is going to override that, and they won't continue long enough to make a big difference. That's my prediction.
I'm starting to get pretty sick of so-called conservatives or whatever blaming everything on white liberal women, because that just gives them an excuse to eke into the so-called progressive fucking mindset where it's white people that are the problem. Like, but it's okay if it's white women who are the problem. No, it's women who are the problem. Don't get me wrong. It's most definitely women who are the problem.
Yeah, but when we're talking about money, it's usually being spent, but like somebody spending their husband's money, it's usually white liberal women. When you're talking about like organization and promotion of communism, the grift, like Black Lives Matter, where they take in a bunch of money and then they spend it on themselves, that's usually black liberal women. But it's both ends of it are liberal women doing those things. The misandry, on the other hand, you get that from women of all political facets.
Well, women of all stripes suffer from I say suffer, but they have this tendency towards relational aggression.
Yes.
Like any given nation, as soon as it has the economic wherewithal to do so, they will fall upon their women and the relational aggression of their women, and the relational aggression of their women will spread to their men, and eventually to their children, to the youngest of possible age, and they'll keep teaching it to the children of the youngest possible age. Like, it's like race really is secondary to all of this. And if you're going to talk about white liberal women, like, it's not like the fact that they're white is tertiary. The fact that they're liberal is secondary. The fact that they're women is primary. Okay, yeah. So if you
the way that the method changes, that's what I'm talking about. Like you look at a different method. Each group has their different methods. What are they doing? For instance, you have the racial victim signaling. White women really don't get a lot of leverage with that for the most part, unless they are leveraging it with certain types of conservatives. But for the most part, that if they shout that, they're shouting into the wind. Nobody cares. right? So they aren't going to use that, but they will use economic power if they have it. Whereas if you have women who have some sort of racial history, that there's, whether they're black or Latino or Asian, they'll use victim signaling on that basis because they can. And so they'll try to eclipse, each one has a reason why they eclipse their femininity behind some other victimhood, right? The illusion of victimhood. And they're all playing victim of things that happened to other people. Things that happened to somebody 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Things that happened to somebody in another country. Things that happened to somebody in another state. Like, for instance, conservative women will play victim of things that happened to women in other states at the hands of gang members from other countries. And then they'll make the issue about women and not about crime, right? And as if men are not also being killed by gang members from other countries. They are, by the way, often in the course of protecting the women in their lives, but not always. We also have Packard also pointed out that both Shoe on Head and Your Dumpster Fire. I don't know Your Dumpster Fire. That one's a unfamiliar person to me. State they ask their husbands how to vote. I'm not going to come out and say that I ask my husband how to vote. But what I do when I'm thinking about the issues I'm voting on is I talk to him about it. Because nobody I know is a better idea sorter and idea vetter than he is. Right? So if I'm thinking about something and I bring it up to him and we talk about it and I'm not considering something important, usually he is able to peg the important thing that I am not thinking about, like nail it right there and say, hey, have you considered? And especially when we're talking about local issues, like often you'll have funding on the ballot for schools and stuff like that. And my knee-jerk reaction is anytime there's something on the ballot, we want to fund this or that. And they say things like, well, it's not going to result in any new taxes. I always suspect that, yes, it will, just not right now. And so it takes a lot for me to vote yes on any issue, right? Once in a blue moon, he'll have something to say that I'll be like, oh, okay, that I might actually vote yes on this. But very rarely when something like that is under discussion, does he come up with anything that I haven't already thought of. But there have been times where I've looked at different candidates or different ideas and stuff. It was actually, discussing politics a little bit here and there with my husband that got me thinking about, really most of the things that we talk about in the men's rights movement are not a left-right issue in that one party is going to rescue us, right? And one party is going to make everything okay for men, give men equal treatment, respect what men contribute to society, and give men fair treatment. There isn't one party that's going to do that. Working with the different parties in power will take different pathways because there are different languages that they speak. And there are different values that they express. And there are things that, if you have to be able to show the politician how they can sell the change that they're making to the public. And so unless you can do that, we can't persuade any political group to work with us on anything. We don't have what they want. They're not ethical. They're not morally guided. They're I would say both major political parties that control politics in the U.S. are pretty pretty sociopathic, right? They're in it for them. They don't really, as a party, necessarily care about the public. They don't care about the people. They're kind of like two different sides of Cthulhu. So you have to show Cthulhu what's in it for Cthulhu. What are you going to feed him in order to get what you want? And this particular type of Cthulhu eats public relations. Basically, they have to be able to market themselves every election. So you have to be able to feed them a way to market themselves in the next election. Look what we accomplished for everybody by changing the law to support equal treatment of men in this one way. Women of all stripes exploit the shit out of that. Absolutely use it to their best advantage. And you find that Republicans will work with feminist groups. Democrats will work with church groups. They will cross party lines and back and forth like they're trying to do a zigzag stitch on a giant flag across the country. And UN Women is no different. Like they will reach out to parties on both sides of the aisle to get what they want, and their propaganda that they use to do this plays on whatever type of victimhood, female victimhood, that particular party finds most marketable to its base. So the left thinks women are victims of a stifling family structure and stifling morality. And the right thinks that women are victims of an exploitative loss of family structure and exploitative immorality. And the reason that both sides have those opinions, they don't afford women the agency to make their own choices. So if the norm is a particular family structure, then the left says, oh, well, women have to do this. They don't have a choice, even though they always have. If the prevailing rebellion against the norm is a particular avenue of immorality or a particular avenue of destruction of family structure, the right then treats women who want to have that family structure or want to be morally wiser as victims of the fact that they're outliers to this rebellion against morality or whatever. They treat it like it's an attack. That you have to protect women from the criticism and demonization of the left. But then when you see the same thing happening to men, right? The left portray men as predators and criminals, even though less than 1%, less than 1/10 of 1%, in fact, of the world population commits violent crimes. Sorry. Neither party will speak up because they don't have that same failure to afford agency. Well, men don't have to actually be what they're stereotyped as, so therefore it's not that big of a deal that these people are stereotyping men, even though they're advocating for legislation and getting it passed based on those stereotypes. So women capitalize on it, men haven't, historically, and that's probably the one thing that we really need to be able to change in the movement. Not necessarily through victimhood, but through increasing emphasis on common sense and results. I think we need to get the public more results oriented. And that's probably going to be our biggest challenge. But back to UN Women. So what we've talked about in the past, right? We went over the fact that they were specifically targeting us. They had several articles that we'd been looking at on their plans to take down the manosphere. One of their big things that they had intended to do is to persuade world governments to censor us. Right? They wanted a system where your government would tell your social media companies what we could and could not say in order to prevent us from being able to criticize the actions of these feminist organizations. And they also had plans then to essentially not just go after, the social media companies and make them censor us, but get laws enacted similar to the misogyny laws that you see happening now in the UK, where if someone like, say, maybe not me, because they wouldn't go after a woman as quickly as they would a man, but possibly because we're on the wrong side of the fence. But let's say they might look at Paul Elam's article that feminists mischaracterize as serious, the satire where he made fun of that stupid cat blog, Jezebel. Sorry, I do have a cold. I'm gonna end up coughing too much. But where he made fun of Jezebel's writers for saying that they beat up their boyfriends, bragging about it and stuff, their husbands and their boyfriends, by writing an article. If you see Jezebel in the street, knock that bitch out, something along those lines. And it said at the beginning of the article, he had to put a disclaimer to show that it was parody. But in the article, if you read the entire article, it was pretty obvious that it was parody. And he very clearly pointed out that, we would rightfully recognize treating women violently in that manner as wrongful violence. But as soon as they say it about men, it's funny, all of a sudden, to people. And that is an unequal treatment. Right? Articles like that, where the point he was making, ultimately, wasn't that people should be engaging in violence toward women, but was that it's just as bad for women to engage in violence toward men. That would get him jailed under policies that UN Women wanted enacted in countries all over the world. Now in the United States, where we live, not in the same state, but both of us are American citizens, I don't think that there's a legal avenue necessarily to make that happen without significant challenges to whatever laws might be passed, because it'd be a violation of the First Amendment right to freedom of speech if the federal government tried to regulate that. You say that you couldn't parody a violent article. He declared Bash a Violent Bitch Month to draw attention to a problem. But again, like I said, I don't think we would have that repercussion here, but I think they could achieve it all over the rest of the world. And I think most countries, the legislators wouldn't read past the first paragraph after the disclaimer, which they would skip. And the next things that you would have would be laws stating that kind of writing can't be allowed. You'd have misogyny laws. I'm surprised, by the way, that Australia doesn't have those. Like that the UK was first, because feminism in Australia is even worse.
Consider that women are stronger than children. to a certain age, certainly until teenage age. And we can wax all kinds of lyrical about how much women beat their children. In the same way, we can wax lyrical about how men beat their wives or the women in their lives or whatever. And we could present a satire either way about these things. I mean, imagine presenting a satire about how children should beat their mothers. Before I elaborate on that, I just want to let it percolate among your minds, right? Given that women are stronger than their children up to a certain age, certainly up to the teenage age, to what degree would it be acceptable to present a satire or even a serious artistic diatribe as to the degree to which we should be encouraging children to beat the shit out of their mothers? I wonder if I've just presented my own Elam moment.
Yeah.
if this is what people are going to present as, look at what Dr. Randerbegam said. He said that children should beat the shit out of their mothers. And yeah, no, I'm just like, you know how this power differential is often painted, that it's okay for women to beat men because they're just so much weaker, except when it comes to sports, in which case you can identify it as whatever you want.
Well, or in the workplace, like you obviously, even in the harshest of work environments, women do equal work, right?
It's just we're always fighting this war on two fronts, where feminists will acknowledge that men are stronger than women when it comes to these domestic issues, but when it comes to sports, no, biological men are not stronger than women. You can't possibly say that because that's misogynistic, and so we should let men beat the shit out of women in the boxing ring because they're and none of it makes any fucking sense. But I'm just trying to draw a parallel, a modern day parallel to Paul's infamous article about Jezebel. That it's not okay for men to beat women because men are stronger than women, but it's also not okay for women to beat men, even though they're weaker than men. Well, what if I suggested that it's okay for children to beat the shit out of their mothers? Would that work? Even though children are weaker than their mothers, does that make sense? No, it doesn't, does it? Because it would just be another form of relational aggression. Like, people shouldn't beat the shit out of each other in general. Like, it's not like, unless you're actually fearing for your life, unless you actually have to beat the shit out of someone in order to prevent a greater violence from happening. Like, people shouldn't be beating the shit out of each other. They shouldn't even be punching each other. They shouldn't even be bopping each other in ways that seem irrelevant. But
you have the soggiest of knees, Doc.
Yeah, it's people like to say that men are naturally more violent than women, but they're not. Women naturally will bop men. Do I need to explain what a bop is? Where they just go because you said something spicy, because you said because you said
Women
a spicy
slap.
because you said a spicy joke, and so they just instinctively just sort of bop you on the chest. It doesn't hurt, obviously, but they do it anyway because their first instinct is to do something a little bit violent, because they can't think of anything else to say in reaction to the spicy thing you just said. So they just go psh, because they know it's not going to hurt you. But when you translate this to the relationship between women and children, they do the same thing. If a child says something a little bit spicy, the woman will just bop them, and in that scenario, it kind of does hurt. because women don't know their own strength. They don't care about their own strength because they're always comparing it with men's strength. They can always bop a man because it doesn't hurt. And so they think they can always bop a child because it doesn't hurt, but it kind of does. Not just
it doesn't always teach either.
Not just physically, but psychologically. A woman will just instinctively bop a child, especially when there's no man in the house, when she can't just delegate that violence to the man in the house, which is how it usually works. If there's no man in the house, which there frequently isn't in this day and age of single mothers and such.
Well, see, now in those houses, they're doing more than bop. Right? You haven't heard of the flying slipper of death. Women will take their footwear off and throw it at their kid. And some women are quite adept at hitting the child in the side of the head with a flying shoe or slipper, flip-flops, whatever. And this is, or the other one is they'll take the shoe off and smack the child with it, like they use it as a whip or a paddle. And I mean, I've seen this, I've witnessed this with friends growing up, that the kid does or says something that the mom considers a bridge too far, inappropriate, whatever. And the kid, the next thing you know, the kid's running across the room, being pursued by an angry woman wielding a piece of footwear as a bludgeon and getting hit on the butt and the side of the head. Like, they'll hit the top of the head right behind the ear is like the target, or around the shoulders. And God forbid you accidentally turn your head at the wrong moment because your lip is getting split. And I've seen that. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood where that was not uncommon as a practice when it came to, you know, and of course, there are some ethnicities that are known for it more than others. So you don't, if you are messing around and you see your Hispanic friend's mom start taking off one of her shoes, you better run. She won't even differentiate between which kid is hers and the other kids in the room. Everybody's getting slippered. But yeah, this is a common behavior among women. And yeah, they would freak the fuck out if you said their kids should hit them back. They would be, first of all, they're authoritarian. So the idea that their kids should rebel or resist in any way is offensive to them. But second of all, you know, they're only going to be thinking of their sons hitting them back, and the first thing that they'll say is that that's misogynistic, because obviously, you know, boys can't hit any female.
Fathers can get around this quite easily with the stink eye or with a slightly raised voice, just a "Oi!" That sort of thing. In a way, women can't. I don't know why they say. Well, it's probably because
my mom could,
because it's a deeper voice. But you know, in general, men have this. Fathers have this way of they just seem scarier. That there's probably some evolutionary reason for this. All they have to do is raise their hand without actually attacking with it, or just raise their voice without actually going on a fucking rant about it, or just giving the old stink eye without adding a bunch of psychological torture on top of it. Whereas women, they can't do what fathers can do without following through with an actual beating or an actual screaming or an actual psychological torture. And this is why it's so important for men to be in the household in the first place, because they can enact this authoritarianism so much easier and without escalating it into unnecessary bullshit.
In fact, most of the time when when you do find child abuse that is perpetrated by the dad, you find a man who has not matured into adulthood by the time he became of age. Humans are born violent. We are violent from the moment we are able to start controlling our movements. And it's not just violence to get stuff. Like, we think it's hilarious when we're little to bop people in the face and get a surprised look or whatever and laugh. Somebody gets bonked on the head, it's funny, and so on. Like, that's one of the earliest forms of humor your baby engages in, is laughing because you got hit on the nose or you got hit on the head, and stuff, giggling about stuff like that. And then the next thing that happens when your baby is old enough to start, like, moving around and picking up toys and playing with them and everything, is that if two children of close to the same age at that stage in their life, when they're still learning to control some of their movements, but they have enough that they can pick up toys and play with them, if one of them has a toy and the other one wants it, they don't try to share, they don't try to enjoy the toy together, they don't offer a trade. Those are not natural behaviors right up front. Those are things that you learn later on through aversion to violent consequences of confrontation in early childhood, where you see another kid with a toy that you want and you bop that kid on the head to get that toy, and the kid turns around and bops you back harder, and you realize that bopping is not necessarily the best way to determine who gets the toy. That maybe you might try some more diplomatic method, and so on. And you learn that throughout childhood by getting into fights and losing. And boys do that throughout their entire childhood. Boys frequently get into rough and tumble play fights, serious fights, all kinds of, learning how to get along with each other, or learning how to not get along with each other, and essentially learning ways to avoid being the target of violence. And you want to learn, if you want to avoid being the target of violence, one of the primary ways to avoid that is to not engage in violence if you're a boy, because there isn't anybody going, behind you going, "You can't hit him, he's a boy." Nobody says that to anyone. "You can't hit him, he's a boy," as opposed to, "You can't hit her, she's a girl. It's not okay to hit her because she's a girl." Right? We do say that about girls. "You can't hit her, she's a girl. What's wrong with you? You're hitting a girl." And so girls don't have the same set of lessons historically growing up about violence. And therefore, they consider violence to be a different animal when they are the target than it is when a guy is the target. They consider it to be more okay when it happens to male human beings than it is when it happens to female human beings. And when male human beings complain about female violence, women get offended. They don't just get a little offended either. They get very offended. You're a misogynist, for instance, if you think that if an attacker is female and the target of the attack is male, that doesn't mean the target should be obligated to endure the attack without attempting to defend himself in any way. Just having that opinion will get you deemed a misogynist. Can you imagine suggesting the reverse, that if a target is male, or if the attacker is female, or is male and the target is female, that the target should just endure the attack without defending herself in any way because men are exempt from your self-defense somehow. We would be told how oppressive that is to women. We would be told how evil that is, even if we were talking about just a subset of men. Well, if a guy who is disabled does something to you, physically disabled, not mentally, physically disabled, does something to you, and you could get away with him, you shouldn't hit him back. Just telling women that is enough to get you called a misogynist. But you could suggest that a man should be able to hit a woman back if she's bigger and stronger than him. And you'd still get told, no, she's a woman. A man should never hit a woman. Right? So yeah, there is a definite inequality there. And part of it is that women don't fully understand the consequences and rules around violence. They don't understand what stems from not learning to control your violence, because they don't, and they don't face the repercussions a man would face if he didn't learn how to control his violence. UN women, in terms of what we've seen from them historically, when they complain about men's rights activists and other manosphere entities, try to portray us as violent. And they do so mostly by association with people who aren't actually involved in any men's rights activism or any other men's issues discussion or activity. They just are people who went off. And they do it by trying to connect dots that don't really connect. And the result ends up being, these articles where they'll write about one guy, and then they'll write as if an entire movement of fathers' rights advocates and men who don't want to be kept out of goods and services that are provided for victims of intimate partner and sexual violence should be ignored because this guy did this thing. And their logic for wanting to censor us is essentially that men should not have the right to object to that. The men should not have any say in whether we view them as individuals or as a monolith. And women are not a monolith, but men apparently are. And so their whole outlook on social media, the things that they have said on the social media that they want us to be censored on, what this article says, what Mr. Nuzzo has found, essentially, analyzing all 499 tweets published by UN Women between September 24, 2024 and September 30, 2025. So basically just a few days. But he went through and analyzed, or not just a few days, but a year. He went on to describe what their actual percentage was of different things. So here we go. First thing is that they mostly tweeted about women, right? Most of them referred only to girls or women. Less than 1% referred to only boys and men, and 1.6% referred to both sexes. So clearly they're going to be biased toward women. They're going to be mostly talking about women. What I have found interesting when looking at how they tweet, then when they talk about women and men's behavior, like I said, that acceptability of behavior, they expect you to accept violence from women. And violence women engage in for reasons they consider to be self-defense have to be protected, right? But men shouldn't be allowed to defend themselves. Again, country. So most of the time they don't specify a country, but when they did, 8% was Gaza. So like I said, Israel probably isn't going to be stepping up to fund these guys. Then they fall into line here: Afghanistan, Sudan, Ukraine, Lebanon, and then all other countries. Their tweet topics, mostly women's rights. The next thing down, violence, safety, protection, and then war and peace and women's leadership. And we're looking at, again, this is UN Women, so they're going to be primarily talking about women. So the idea that they would be talking about women's rights, pretty standard, right? Violence, safety, and protection, though. I mean, the primary victims of violence in the world, the majority of victims of violence in the world are men. And UN Women, of course, ignores that. And the majority of perpetrators of violence in the world fall into this, at least of non-war related violence, fall into this group of less than 1/10 of 1% of the world population. UN Women generalizes that to all men on a regular basis. Very little discussion about actual issues that women face. Right? Family and mothers, 2.4% of their tweets. They don't say a lot about us in their tweets. That they save their articles for that. This was an interesting one. So he says the 5 most common topics were, and we talked a little bit about some of this. Gender equality and women's rights, 29.7% of tweets. Violence and women's safety / protection, war and peace, women's leadership, fund and invest in women. For the current analysis, the category of violence and women's safety / protection consisted of tweets on domestic violence against women and online violence against women, digital threats against women, and any tweets that contained the words safety or protection. So the category war and peace included any tweets on war and any tweets that included the word peace. So, all of the things that we've been reading about them complaining about would have been included in that 21%. Their main message was that women around the world are experiencing widespread victimization, including unequal rights, and that gender equality can be achieved only if women are given more money, greater political power, and further protections from perceived physical and non-physical harms. So that's the avenue. What they were trying to do, what we were funding, the thing that we were paying into, was an organization that was trying to get laws passed to protect women against words. Word.
What kind of word? Cunt? I mean,
yeah.
Am I under arrest?
I don't know. That one's it depends. Are you pretending to be Australian?
What about misandry? Is that going to do me in?
What were you saying? I can't understand your accent. So, skipping like the domestic violence thing, I think we've talked about that ad nauseum. It's difficult to not do that though, because it's one of their biggest topics, feminism's biggest topics, and we know because we've showed you the research that the majority of domestic violence is actually two-way. That among one-way domestic violence, 70% of it is female perpetrated, and that among two-way domestic violence, that's associated with more violence from women than from men. So most of that is also female initiated. And again, like I said, women do not mature as much as men do when it comes to violence, and so they don't learn to control their violence. So they do have a habit of pushing men into corners, backing men up against the wall, poking and prodding, yelling, hitting, and generally getting into a man's space until he snaps and defends himself, and then playing victim. And because of that, we have this idea that there's a huge amount of only female victims of domestic violence, when in fact, that's a traumatic experience, having somebody back you up against the wall, stick a finger in your chest repeatedly, and then start slapping you and hitting you, even if it's not doing significant damage, even if they're not good at it. It is a traumatic experience. And eventually you do lose control of your ability to refrain from striking back or lashing out or pushing them away. And even just a little push to push someone away who is doing that to you, if you're a man and the person who is attacking you is female, that can get you sent to jail, even if you're covered in bruises and she's completely uninjured. David Lowboy says, Twat did you say? I can't hear you. I've an inner ear infection. It's the yeast of my problems, and now I must finger it out. That's great. Recently, we've talked about their digital violence threats and safety. This is a big deal for me, right? This is a major thing. UN Women and other feminist groups, when they talk about this, they'll say digital threats, and they'll say threats that lead to real-world violence. But then when you look at what they want censored, it's not threats. It's not anything that leads to real-world violence. It's men saying things like, when women should get back in the kitchen, which is, nothing happens when a man says that. A man can say that all he wants. I just had an argument with a guy, a troll, that I'm pretty sure was just trying to make the men's rights movement look bad. Some dipshit. And the argument is unfortunately gone because the dipshit got really aggressive and got suspended. The account seems to be gone, but essentially this individual said every way, shape, or form, shut the fuck up because you're a woman, get back in the kitchen, blah blah blah, and nothing happened to me. Literally nothing. There was zero impact on me. Well, there was one thing. I gained followers. I don't know why. I mouthed off to the guy a bunch of times. Like I didn't really, I made fun of him for his stereotypical, like this was, I'm pretty sure this was a feminist trying to create, not clickbait, but quote mining opportunities, and nobody jumped in and defended this individual because nobody in the men's rights movement actually talks like that to anybody. It's not a normal behavior, right? And it's funny, and it might be done as a joke, but it's not a real behavior. Nobody does that.
It's like I was saying earlier in the show about how the UN does nothing but speech can lead to actions. And I know that kind of makes me sound like I'm one of these feminist snowflakes who's talking about how speech leads to violence. But it's like I said, it's a matter of scale. Like, do we have educational institutions in which men's misogynistic speech leads to violence against women. I don't think we do. I don't think we do. Across the entire educational industry, if you can call it that, and the entire media industry, if you can call it that, we don't have speech that leads men to deal violence to women. Every effort has been made across all of these sectors to make sure that men's speech does not lead to men's violence. But no effort has been made to prevent women's speech from leading to violence against men. The very idea of women's violence against men it has been rendered as nothing but a fantasy. But it's not. It is not a fantasy. Women's violence against men is just as much as a reality as it's always been. But the efforts of our education system and our media system has only presented as a smokescreen, as this effort to present this idea that women are never violent against men, whereas they are. And it's a problem, and it's always been a problem. And if all you do is pretend that it's not a problem, you're only just going to make it worse. And that is indeed what has happened.
Yeah.
I mean, we're sort of programmed, dare I say, evolutionary programmed to make sure that all violence is exacted against men, because men are the appropriate recipients of violence, whether it be from men or women, and that women don't do violence. There's no such thing as female violence, especially not female violence against men. And the efforts of UN women, or indeed UN, or indeed any given government, or indeed any given affectation of modernity, it's all just been an effort to pretend that violence by women against men is just not a thing, and so we don't need to worry about it. And so it keeps happening, and so it keeps happening, and so when women are violent against men, and indeed women are violent against boys of the youngest of all ages, it just keeps happening, and the consequences of that violence are just blamed on men. And here we have it. We have generational violence of women against men, and because it's never acknowledged as a thing that happens, it's just a thing that keeps happening, and no effort is ever made to prevent it from happening. Whereas
Honestly,
every effort is made to prevent men from being violent against women. And yeah, that's a good idea. Men shouldn't be violent against women, and God bless everyone for making sure that doesn't happen. But it would be awesome if at the same time some effort was made to prevent women from being violent against men and boys. But such effort has not been made, and we found ourselves with this, dare I say, pipeline of men and boys who have had violence exacted upon them, and so those men and boys exact violence upon whoever happens to be in their general vicinity, and who happens to be in their general vicinity is women, because they happen to have been raised in single mother families. And all anyone can do about this is go, well look, men and boys are being violent against women because they've been raised in environments where the only thing in their general vicinity is women. Well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe
Yeah, yeah, actually.
If you didn't deprive men and boys of anything but women, then there would be some violence against anyone but women.
Well, or there might be less violence in general because
Indeed,
boys who are raised in homes with active fathers, with involved fathers, are less likely to get into trouble with the law. They're less likely to engage in violence. But one of the worst aspects of female violence against men, in my opinion, is proxy violence, and it becomes easily disguised as male violence because women will use male gynocentrism and male loyalty to any particular woman, or they will use law enforcement. And so this thing about digital threats, for instance. Now this one tweet that they've highlighted here is about journalists, right? But the articles that we've read in the past on HBR Talk that UN Women have published and other feminist organizations have published, trying to impose censorship on social media in women's name. What they've basically stated is that they want the ability to get people arrested for saying things that feminists deem misogynistic. And if you want to know the long list of things that feminists deem misogynistic, you don't look at what they say on X about words leading to violence, where you say somebody says I'm going to come to your house and do XYZ to you, and then they do it. You look at what they put into their research. They have a questionnaire they use to measure different types of sexism, like different questionnaires actually for different types of sexism, and one of them is on sexism that you don't necessarily think of as sexism, like benevolent sexism, or another one is on, I think they don't use the word inherent sexism. It's something like that, though. It's sexism that is, it flies below your radar, right? And they would include things like, if you say women do bad things, right? They have a list of bad things that people do, both men and women, and they'll make a statement, true or false, women do this thing. Well, yeah, sometimes women do that thing. So you say, yes, you're sexist, right? Because they've stated it as a stereotype. They didn't say all women. They didn't say most women. They didn't say some women. They just said women. And you answered yes, because to answer no would mean that women never do that thing, and you know that some women do. But they take it as you saying that thing is characteristic of being female, that men don't do it, but women do. And therefore, you're sexist because of the way they interpret your answer. So that's essentially, like, if you criticize the fact that mothers are more likely to be child abusers than fathers, if you point out that 70% of children who are abused to death by one parent acting without the other are killed by their mothers, not their fathers. If you point that out online, they consider that sexist. It's true, it's a fact, but it's sexist because you're criticizing women. They consider it woman bashing to acknowledge that people who do bad things can be female, and being female doesn't make it okay to do those bad things, and that we should consider perpetrators of bad things to still be dangerous and in need of reformation, even if they are women, right? Those kinds of statements they would want you arrested for. Arrest is violent. by its nature, you are being forcibly kidnapped, right, and stuck in a cage when you get arrested. So it's something that our society should only reserve for circumstances when the individual being targeted with it is a real, present threat to the community, and that threat cannot be abated in some other way. But they want you arrested for saying that women can be mean, that women can be bitches, right? That women can be dishonest, that women can lie, and that women can use lies to hurt other people, that other people can face consequences when a woman lies, and that those other people who face those consequences when a woman lies deserve reparations, that they deserve for that woman to face repercussions, and they deserve to have as much repair done to their lives as possible by the community, because the community is the instrument that the woman used to hurt them when she lied. Right? Just saying that. They want you to be arrested for that. They want you to be arrested for noticing women's body shape. Right? If you don't like fat chicks, or if you don't like women with big tits or small tits or whatever. You like big butts and you cannot lie, or you hate big butts and you cannot lie. They want you arrested for saying it. Not for breaking into somebody's house and stealing their stuff at risk of their life and limb. Not for beating people up on the street. Not for throwing bricks through windows and stealing from stores because something happened in another state that you have some means of playing victim of. Nope. Just if you say, bitches be crazy. Or just if you say, Amy Schumer's new bikini pictures are ugly. Any of those statements, you're being threatened with being targeted for arrest. So the idea that defunding UN women, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of feminists out there. There will be hate, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and maybe in a future show we'll show some of that if it's entertaining enough. But I want you to remember, when you see upcoming complaints about the United States ceasing to fund this organization, that what they have stopped funding is an organization that has been pushing for you to get arrested if you advocate that women should go to jail for lying to the police about being raped, and getting a man put in jail on the basis of those lies.
And if women complain along the lines of, but UN women were doing things, and we can say to them, no, UN women was never doing anything. All it was ever doing was saying things. And women will say, but we wanted them to say those things. And we'd be like, yeah, but saying things isn't the same as doing things. And then they'll say, no, saying things can result in doing things. And I'd be like, yeah, all right, that was the point that I was making a lot earlier on in the show. But we're sat here dreaming of a world in which saying things isn't necessarily doing things. Doing things is doing things. And saying things is saying things. And yes, there should be some kind of crossover. But that crossover shouldn't involve the likes of UN women. Obviously, there's always going to be, we start by saying things and then we finish by doing things. But it shouldn't have to be filtered through an institution as evil as UN women, or as the UN in general. These middlemen, and I say middlemen quite ironically, what I should be saying middle women. These middle women shouldn't exist in the first place because they only serve to muddy the waters between saying things and doing things. Because all the UN has ever done has taken the saying things and fuck it up beyond all recognition before it can ever become doing things. It's just been there to prevent important things from being done, for the sake of unimportant things being said, and that is that's the gender dynamic in a nutshell. Women just want things to be said. Men want things to be done.
Yeah.
And the shite state of affairs in which we found ourselves is largely because we've been under the rubric of women who just want things to be said, at the expense of men who actually want things to be done.
And we have to recognize a difference too. There's a massive overarching difference. Something that it's almost ridiculous. It is ridiculous, honestly, that people ignore it. The difference between some rando on social media telling some other rando on social media like me, shut the fuck up, bitch, get back in the kitchen, which has literally zero impact on my life. Somebody can say that, and a minute later, I'm watching TV with my husband eating potato chips. Big fat hairy deal, right? And somebody walking into a congressman's office and bringing in a bunch of mocked up fake statistics and saying, we have an emergency, you have to change the law so that women can get a conviction in cases where they've accused a man of certain types of crime without having to present any evidence, and they can't be cross-examined fully because it might embarrass them. And the congressman goes, okay, that speech is lobbying, and it's actual setting things in motion. It's Rube Goldberg's speech, where an effect happens on the lives of individuals. A man who goes to jail because it doesn't take evidence to prove that he committed a crime, in terms of the court making a decision. And he's also not allowed to introduce some of his exculpatory evidence, and he's not allowed to cross-examine the accuser as effectively as he would be if the accuser claimed that he broke into her car and stole it. And so he goes to jail for those reasons, and not because he actually committed a crime and it was demonstrably proved by physical evidence that showed him committing the crime or that placed him at the scene, and so on. He is a victim of that speech. He is a victim of that lobbying. And he is a victim of the congressman listening. Like, when they use lies to get laws passed that allow them to use lies to destroy your life, that speech is an actual threat. That is dangerous. And if somebody were to say, there have been a couple instances where somebody has online has said they were going to come get me or do things to me. One person published my address and a bunch of other addresses that were previously associated with my name, but I didn't live there anymore. And, I filed police reports and emphasized that I don't think anything's going to happen, but if something does, now you have this. And so that there's not going to be a big investigation. The cops aren't going to waste their time on it. But then if something happens to me, they have a thread to follow. But in terms of actual, that's like 1 in a billion things that people have said to me online. And for the most part, none of it has any impact on me. I actually laughed at the guy that published my address, made fun of him. because it's not like anybody else couldn't have found it if they wanted it. Right? That stuff is your address. Every single person that's listening right now, your address is available for 99 cents on one of hundreds of websites, any one of hundreds of websites that sell that information. But in any case, yeah, there's a humongous difference between somebody saying something like that and then doing nothing, right? Versus somebody going to the police and lying and getting you arrested, or somebody going to your politicians, your legislators, and lying and getting laws passed that result in a lot of people getting wrongly arrested. That's the speech that we should be looking at and controlling. And the reason is not because freedom of speech shouldn't be absolute, but because regardless of your ability to own something, right, like a car or a swimming pool or a gun, you're liable for the actions that you take with it. And if you use it as a weapon to do damage to another person wrongfully, then you're liable for that action. So it's not the fact that you used your speech, it's the fact that you attacked another person wrongfully and did harm. That's where that speech should be controlled. Just saying something shitty to somebody online, the government shouldn't get involved in that. But that's what UN Women wants. They want you to not be able to contradict them so that they can go to their politicians with more lies and get more laws passed that allow women to get you arrested on the basis of lies without facing repercussions and without you having any recourse.
And yeah, for anyone who's giving me the obvious response of, but Dr. Adamcam, all you do is say things. You just sit here online, like shouting a bunch of things, and I'm like, yes, I am no better than a woman. Like I'm no better than some man who just barks a bunch of shit. Yeah, I never pretended to be otherwise. I'm not a politician. I'm not a great man of history. I am someone who decided from quite an early age that all I'm going to do is yell a bunch of shit. And you know, I never pretended otherwise. I'm
at least you're not lying.
Yeah, I'm never going to be a politician, but I'm here to tell people that, you know, men should be politicians. I'm here to enforce the idea that certain people should be the great men of history and certain people should not. I should not be one of the great men of history. I'm just one of these goblins sat in the background yelling things at people. And I'm like, I'm letting women know that that's what you should be too. I'm letting men know that's what you should be too. If you're one of the 95th percentile of people, and that includes like rock stars and intellectual blowhards who are only ever going to sit here like yelling their political opinions at people. Like, that's fine. That's the best that most of us can achieve. Well, the best that most of us can achieve is just being a blue collar worker, just keeping the infrastructure of our society going. And you know, I'm not here acting like I'm one of the great men of history. I'm just here doing what I can do to nudge the great men of history, and I'm just telling the great men of history that you shouldn't fucking simp for women, because there are very few women who are gonna be the great women of history, and as it happens, I work with a few of those women. Like I live out in some hope that the women I work with here at Honey Badger Radio might one day be recognized as some of the smartest people who ever lived. Yeah, and I'm not even joking. Hannah and Alison and Karen are some of the smartest people who ever lived. But they're not going to get statues built of them. They're just going to sit here like going, "You're all a bunch of fucking idiots, and this is how you should do things differently. And what you should do is stop fucking simping for women, stop fucking simping for outsiders. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
just fucking get back to what you know is obviously true." And like, yeah, and this is what some of us are here to do. We're just normal people. We're just simple men and women, just telling you to fucking do what you know to be true, and that's all we were ever here to do. We're just here to remind you to give yourself permission to believe what you already believe, what your ancestors already believed for the longest time, and just to fucking
Or at
do
least
away.
to not
Do
believe something just because it's politically correct,
Yeah,
rather than because it's
do
true.
away with this with this shit we call politically correct. There's obviously a euphemism. Just do away with
Yeah.
this with whatever we refer to by these euphemisms like progressive and politically correct and social justice and woke and all this bullshit. It's it's just new for the sake of being new. It was never going to work. It was always bullshit. Just give yourself permission to believe what you always believed. That's all it is. It's
Well,
really quite.
and I will balk at the idea that I'm like super smart. I know I've had IQ tests that have like put me way up there and everything, but
That's
when it comes
exactly
down
what
to
what a super smart person would say, Hannah.
stop. You're very kind, but I want you to remember, even though we've examined a lot of things that maybe people don't look at too deeply most of the time. When it comes down to men's rights and the topic itself and the aspects of the topic, the various ideas surrounding the topic, there isn't anything that I've talked about that is breaking some new genius ground. This is all just common sense. People already know this stuff. All right. People are already aware that all human beings are human. So when I point out that all human beings are human, it's not a genius move. It's me being flabbergasted that it has to be said. Why do people not understand that men are as human as women? Why is it that when I say on social media a line like that, men are just as human as women, that I will get people pushing back on that idea? An idea that is fundamentally true and ridiculously simple, right? Not something out there or up there. And I think the reason isn't because most people are stupid. I think the reason is because most people have been brainwashed into a level of gynocentrism that is crippling. And it's a different type of stupid. It's not the low IQ stupid. It's you have
Midwit
shut off
stupid.
important parts of your brain stupid. And I'm not brilliant for recognizing things that are simple and true. I'm just pissed off that everybody else doesn't also recognize these things. Where I'm at should be the baseline, not the top. The things that I say are things that should be very easy for people to recognize, very easy for people to understand, and very easy for people to accept because they're true. Not some Stardust level reaches of philosophy. And it frustrates me. I don't I'm not mad about the compliment, obviously. Everybody likes getting compliments, and it, like I said, it is very kind of you to call me brilliant or smart or whatever, but I don't think I've done anything remarkable, and it shouldn't be remarkable. Nothing I've done should be remarkable. I am where normal should be. And it's a problem that normal isn't there. And that's basically, I think, a solid description of the majority of the men's rights movement. We are where normal should be. We recognize things that should be normal to recognize. That if something is a human right, that it should apply to both sexes equally. That the color of your skin shouldn't determine whether or not it's recognized in regard to your life. That it's respected by the law and protected by the law. Right? These are not cosmic concepts. This is very down-to-earth stuff. And it makes me sad that we don't have more very down-to-earth people. But I am very happy that it's improving. The fact that the President of the United States recognized that an organization that exists solely to capitalize on social gynocentrism in the world and women's victim points by getting laws passed to fund initiatives that they can then capitalize on, and by taking grants from various countries to do things that don't need done. That's a big step forward, in my opinion. It's a very big step forward. And the fact that their use of social gynocentrism as a shield didn't stop him from defunding them is huge. Huge! But it's time to move on to the after show. 9 o'clock, and I do have to work tonight. We might find more to discuss about this next week. Or we might get back to USAIDs. I was prepared if we needed to go back to USAIDs tonight, but we don't. So we'll see what happens. I'll look more at this article because there's some interesting stuff here. But the main thing I would say is this, to me, is a big, big white pill. It's not the biggest white pill. Right? It's not the best white pill, but I'm happy as hell about it anyway. It's a nice late Christmas present. Thanks everybody for listening, and thanks to my co-hosts for going through this with me and discussing this. Thanks to the President of the United States for cutting the purse strings on UN women. Thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. Good night, all.
Machines.
Men's right activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.